Hello and welcome, Professor Rasmussen, a continuation of emotional intelligence, specifically emotional intelligence. In this talk, I'm going to describe some of the remaining components here. However, I'm going to save emotional intelligence and psychopathy and empathy. Whew, that's a mouthful too. There's a lot of mouthfuls in this talk. So I'm going to save that one, the psychopathy and empathy, for a third PowerPoint, totally optional. If you want to watch it, go for it. I think it's really, really helpful for your understanding of psychopathy as well as emotional intelligence. If you're going to go into some sort of criminal justice field, this could be very, very helpful. If you know someone who is psychopathic, then you may want to watch this too. Or if you are psychopathic, then you may want to watch it too. All right, so let's get started. We're going to start talking about the research on EI, that's emotional intelligence, EIQ, emotional intelligence quotient, and the life outcomes. So there's many ways to describe, a score of emotional intelligence, and some of them are EI, some of them are EIQ, and I'm sure there's others too, like EQ as well. So the mixed model is typically called EQ. There's all different sorts of things. So we're going to talk about the integrative approach typically is used here, and that's what we're going to talk about. So basically what researchers have found using multiple various different types of integrative tests, so integrative models, their tests, found oftentimes that academic performance is quite well related, correlated meaning, to a higher score on these emotional intelligence tests. Okay, so they predict attention, verbal ability, and academic performance overall at a correlation coefficient of approximately zero point 0.3. So yeah, it's a pretty moderate to low correlation, but nonetheless, having a high emotional intelligence may actually help you out in the world. Other correlations is that higher EI was positively correlated with social relationships and social competencies. So being a individual who's better at interacting with others, as well as just being able to talk with others and interact with others and understand others. High in EI, people are oftentimes too found as less boring, they're more empathetic, and they're more caring. Okay, and these are some of the work by Meyer and colleagues, and they found this zero point 0.2 to zero point 0.3 range. Again, not super high, but there is a correlation here, so possibly suggesting that there's some sort of cause and effect. But again, it's hard to establish cause and effect because you can't say, hey, you're going to be emotionally intelligent, and you're not. You can only look at what these people are. So let's go into the good and bad with the integrative as well as the mixed model of emotional intelligence. So there's definitely some good, but there's definitely some bad actually in both of them. So the good thing is that both of these models, the integrative and the mixed model, they do separate people into separate categories. Okay, so when you take one of these emotional intelligence tests, you're gonna get separated into a specific category. So it's really, really good at separating people, but is this separation useful? And are you actually a person who gets separated? Are you high emotional intelligence, and then the other person who gets separated into a different category, are they low emotional intelligence? Well, that's kind of the thing here that researchers are really curious about. So here's some work by McCleskey in 2012, so somewhat recent, claims emotional intelligence predicts job performance, but only minorly predicts job performance. Okay, so the interesting thing is, people claim that this emotional intelligence predicts job performance really, really well, but in reality, it predicts it at a very kind of low level, typically less than zero point 0.2 on a correlation coefficient. So this is typically a pretty weak correlation coefficient overall. Another thing is that the definition of these integrative approaches and the content of the IE, they change quite constantly. So the interesting thing is that the definition changes for EI as well as some of the content on how to measure it. So researchers kind of keep going back and forth on what EI is. So this could be one potential problem of the integrative model. Now the mixed model is going to harbor a lot more potential problems. So this is Dan Goleman. Dan Goleman proposed that expressed EQ to be more predictive of academic performance than IQ. Basically, potentially maybe 4 times better of a predictor for academic performance than IQ. What does the research say? No, absolutely no. That's period, okay? There's no evidence to suggest that EQ, especially the way that Dan Goleman's measuring it, is predicting academic performance even one time, even two times better than EQ than IQ, the standardized tests. Okay, there is no possible way. Okay, and science has falsified this claim massively. So then Dan Goleman came back out after the book was published and science was up in an uproar, and he said, "Oh, I might have been mistaken. Let me change this a little bit and let me kind of rework this whole little sentence here." Blah blah blah. So basically, one big takeaway is from Dan Goleman's book is that there is some research, but we're going to talk about the big problem with Dan Goleman's model pretty much right here. Okay. So, right here and on the next slide too. So, scored by self-report, okay, Dan Goleman's model is, okay? Now, if I say to you, how smart are you? You're going to be like, oh man, I'm pretty smart. Another person can be like, oh yeah, I'm pretty smart. Another person can be like, oh yeah, I'm really smart. Person can be like, I'm not so smart, even when they are smart. So this is pretty much a bad way overall to ask someone how smart they are. Now, this is basically what the Dan Goleman's mixed model does, is it's a self-report. Now, in a self-report, people can lie. They can make themselves more appealing. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just how well you portray yourself. So the interesting thing is, with the mixed model and the integrative model, is that they correlate at a terrible level. They correlate together. So a score, if I was to take a score on a mixed model and then an integrative model, that score would be correlated at a roughly, I forgot the point there, a 0.07 to a 0.19 correlation coefficient. That is almost minimal. That is almost at a zero correlation. So that's basically saying if I get a high score in integrative, I might get a really low score in the mixed model. I might get a really high score in the mixed model and get a really low score in the emotional intelligence model, in the integrative model. So you can't predict by taking the test in the integrative model how a person is going to do in the mixed model. So what makes that a problem? Well, what makes that a problem is basically these things are probably not measuring the same thing. People say they're measuring emotional intelligence, but what are they measuring? They might be measuring different things. They might be measuring emotional intelligence in different ways. One of them might be measuring emotional intelligence, the other is not, or maybe they're both not. So this creates a really, really big problem. Again, when you start looking at other tests, these tests should converge. There should be convergent validity. So if I look at you and I give you a test on your athletic performance, and then I give you another test on athletic performance, those should probably correlate together, okay, if they're both tapping into athletic performance. Okay, let's continue. Now, the interesting thing is that these mixed models may not even be measuring any sort of EQ, emotional quotient, or, here I have EI. They might not even be measuring emotion. So the really interesting thing is researchers have found that happiness, your happiness, is negatively correlated with EQ score, okay? For instance, your EQ score is negatively correlated with depression. So if you get a high score on an EQ test on these mixed models of EQ, you're going to likely have low level of depression as measured by the BDI, the Beck's Depression Inventory. You don't need to know that unless you're going into clinical, but that's just a study looking at your depression level. So what does that mean? Well, that means you have a high score on EQ, low score on depression. Well, this is basically saying that maybe this model that Dan Goleman is proposing is actually just tapping into your happiness level. So as happiness increases, guess what? You got a higher EQ score. Personality traits. EQ is positively correlated to emotional stability. We're going to talk about emotional stability in a future chapter from personality traits. But basically, high score in EQ, all right, is going to be positively correlated with emotional stability. That's like how stable you are, how you don't get agitated that easily, so on and so forth. So the more you are in EQ, okay, this measure, guess what? The more you are emotionally stable. So maybe, guess what? Maybe these things are the same thing. Maybe your EQ score is really just looking at emotional stability, okay? Again, they're not a one-to-one correlation. It's a 0.4, still a pretty moderate correlation. Look at EQ positively correlated with extroversion. Extroversion is your need to continue to satisfy yourself, continue to look for things, go out, stimulate yourself, so on and so forth. It's massively at a pretty moderate to strong correlation coefficient. Positive correlation. So higher scores on these EQ tests by Dan Goleman, you're more extroverted. What? Maybe extroversion is actually what these people are measuring. So what researchers are suggesting here is that it could be personality traits, as it could be happiness as well. That is actually the measurements, as opposed to some separate entity for emotional intelligence. Let me give you one final example that's really going to start to put maybe a nail in maybe one nail in the coffin of the mixed model. And so this is by Dana and colleagues. This is why does self-reported emotional intelligence predict job performance? A meta-analysis or meta-analytic investigation of mixed EI. Great. So this research is going to look at a meta-analysis, meaning that it's going to look at all the studies, or a large amount of the studies that have been published on mixed emotional intelligence and job performance. What researchers have found is job performance is very, very highly correlated with, so mixed EI can predict job performance quite well, okay? As I was just saying, beyond cognitive ability and even personality traits. And researchers have found this. So great. Wow. Mixed models? Woo. All right. Boom. Put your hands in the air, right? Wave them around like you just don't care. This is a great model for predicting job performance. Well, let's check this out. So, researchers have looked at this. Results demonstrate that the content of the mixed EI, and I'm just stealing this straight from the paper because I think it's the easiest way to understand it. Content of the mixed EI measure strongly overlaps with a set of well-known psychological constructs. Ability EI, so ability, emotional intelligence. Self-efficacy, the belief that you can do some sort of task and get it done by yourself. Self-rated performance, okay. Conscientiousness, so the ability to stay on task, be reliable. Emotional stability, not getting angry, not getting upset that easily. Extroversion, being able to go out, want to always stimulating yourself. And then general mental ability, just overall intelligence. So this is what researchers have previously found. So, now the researchers, Dana and colleagues, are going to take this knowledge that they have right here and apply it to the mixed EI and see if that still predicts job performance. After controlling for the set of constructs listed prior, that would be these guys right here: conscientiousness, self-efficacy, self-rated performance, all of those that I just said there. So after controlling for those those constructs, all right, mixed EI and job performance relationship became nil. It became nil when researchers controlled for those various constructs. What does that mean? That means the relationship dropped to zero when the researchers took into consideration those factors that I just talked about right there. Everything from ability EI all the way down to mental ability. So, when the relationship becomes zero, then mixed EI does not appear to measure anything new. Boom! Drop the mic. Right? Exactly. Those are my own words right there, and this is what this article is saying. That when you take a look at mixed EI and you compare it to these other prior constructs, meaning these other topics, these other potential mental standpoints that a person can have, when you take a look at those mental standpoints, it seems to be that they are the exact same thing. Dan Goleman is basically stealing these other constructs and putting them together, wrapping them in a nice little package to say that this is emotional intelligence. These are all been researched before Dan Goleman. They are researched multiple different domains. These exist beyond Dan Goleman. Dan Goleman just puts them together and says that's emotional intelligence. Is it? Probably not. They are separate entities in and of themselves. So, take this for what it is. This is basically saying that there are other entities that have already been established that basically seem to make Dan Goleman's model not predictive at all. So, just to wrap this up, getting all worked up here, while EI, emotional intelligence, and EQ seem useful, all right, so EI is more integrative, the EQ is more mixed, they correlate rather poorly, okay, maybe insofar as a zero correlation coefficient. Now, the mixed EI does not appear to measure anything new or anything specific, really to emotional intelligence. So this could create a problem for mixed EI in general. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the talk. We talked about research on EI and EIQ, as well as the good and the bad. Please tune in next time where we're going to talk about psychopathy and how that relates to emotional intelligence. Thanks and have a fantastic